labor negotiations takes front and center stage in Congress. Education outcomes being criticized, the idea of a digital ad tax in Pennsylvania, also conversations on property taxes and beer taxes. This is the Center Square Daily for Thursday, June 11th, 2026. I'm your host, Greg Bishop. The Faster Labor Contracts Act passing the U.S. House. Employers could have a new set of labor policies thrust their way, with that measure making its way through Congress. And it aims to reduce the time it takes for employers and newly certified or recognized labor organizations to reach an initial collective bargaining agreement under the National Labor Relations Act. Now, it was brought up in the U.S. House earlier this week. Democratic New Jersey U.S. Representative Donald Norcross supported the measure.
The Faster Labor Contracts Act creates a fair and reliable time frame for workers and employers to reach their first contract. Workers in this country are guaranteed the right to organize and collectively bargain. Together, by passing this bipartisan bill, we can close one of the biggest loopholes undermining their ability to get an actual contract. Thank you, and I yield back.
Now, Michigan Republican U.S. Representative Tim Walberg, he opposed the measure on the House floor.
The so-called Faster Labor Contracts Act, I will give credit to whoever named this bill, because it certainly accomplishes two things faster. It fast-tracks government intrusion into private workplaces, and it erodes workers' rights faster than we have ever seen before. Let's call this bill what it really is: a massive expansion of Washington's power over American workers and job creators. It is the latest attempt to put workers under the thumb of federal bureaucrats.
Joining us to discuss how this measure could impact small business taxpayers and others, Austin Bannon is the Employment Policy Fellow at Americans for Prosperity. And thanks for taking time with us, Austin. Supporters of this policy, the Faster Labor Contracts Act, they say it protects workers' rights to timely contracts. They also argue that it reduces protracted negotiations that may take too long and promote fairness via mediation and arbitration. What are some of the pitfalls you see in all of this coming together and passing the U.S. House with some bipartisan support?
Yeah, well, thanks for having me to speak on this. This is something I wouldn't have expected a Republican-controlled House to have done over recent decades, but here we are today. I think there's this advocacy that this is something that's fixing a wrong. But I'd first like to point out, it's not mentioned long enough, but the union leaders like this above all because they don't start collecting dues from worker paychecks until a contract is reached. Whether that contract is good or bad for workers or good or bad for employers, once that contract is signed, they get to start collecting dues. And whether the dues are tied to them doing well with the contract doesn't matter. They can then also just blame the business or blame the federal arbitrators for what contract was reached. But either way, they get to collect those dues. So that's the big thing we're facing right here. And we're talking about first contracts for businesses. We're talking about businesses that have never been unionized before. Are those the kind of employers that have a strong familiarity with unions and what collective bargaining looks like? No, nor are the workers. So it's normal that there would be a long process in some situations, some contentious negotiations before a first contract is reached. That's not a bad thing in a free enterprise economy. And this is a difference between how a business can thrive or possibly sink. So we would expect there should be a negotiation process, not a forced one.
What do you see happening with this measure in the Senate? Is it something that's going to get some time on the floor or see possibly brought up for a vote?
So it doesn't have the same opportunity of sort of a discharge process that the House has, but there is concern that we're not too far away from seeing 60 senators that could be supportive of this in some capacity. I believe heard Sean O'Brien mentioned a number of Republicans, without giving names, that may be supportive. So this is something where we're monitoring it closely. It could go through a committee process, the Senate Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions Committee, or leadership if there's enough pressure. It could happen. I think it faces a more difficult road from a procedure standpoint, but we're seeing rising popularity, both in this Congress and potentially building towards another Congress. This was one part of what we call the PRO Act or a number of labor bills were included. This was one component of that. And if Democrats were to take over Congress, or similar numbers where it just becomes a little more popular with Republicans in their control, we're not going to see this go away. And in fact, it could be a part of a building agenda that labor unions are expecting from some Republicans to support.
I want to revisit something you touched on right out of the gate here. This isn't for already established unions that already have contracts with employers, and they may be coming up with a new contract and new terms and whatnot. These are new contracts, like you said, first contracts. Is there a size limit for the business that might be impacted by this? I'm thinking of a small mom and pop coffee shop, for instance.
No, there's not. I recall in Washington, D.C., there was a special cat cafe that went through a unionization process, just a handful of workers. So it doesn't matter if it's 10,000 people or 5. This is a process that could play out for any size business. And that's something else to note. There's this argument that certain contracts took a long time to go into place. I've already laid out the case that that's not necessarily anything that's unhealthy. We have to know the details, and we're talking about people that are facing a unionization effort for the first time. But a lot of those numbers are inflated because they're taking these, the mean average, sort of the overall. One contract could take a couple thousand days in this very contentious situation, and then a lot of other contracts, there was an agreement reached more quickly. And this sort of, overexerts kind of effort to say that this is a broken process for everyone. And that's to say, ones that take longer, it doesn't mean that the process actually failed. Every situation is different.
I've seen the criticism of this saying that the timelines here seem kind of arbitrary. But again, we're talking a federal policy here. We're not talking about one state over the other. Some states might be, right to work states where unionization is not required for private jobs in order to work at that job. You have, the Janus v. AFSCME case that essentially prohibits individuals from being forced into a public sector union. But this is a federal policy. What does this mean if it was to advance out of the Senate? And who knows if the president would sign it or not? What would it mean, though, for the certainty and for the employer when it comes to costs and possible work stoppages?
Yeah. So, you kind of mentioned the right to work policy. Well, something like this impedes part of what the right to work process looks like. It doesn't change whether somebody can be a member of a union or not. But once a contract goes through this process, workers cannot change their mind as to whether they're satisfied with the contract that binding arbitration brings forth. This contract is going to be locked into place for several years. And it could literally have a score of things that undermine workers that they would never vote for. And they don't have a democratic vote in this process anymore. So I also wanted to point that out from a worker perspective. There's a lot of problems here. But for businesses, there's no mystery that when a union becomes present in a workplace, a lot of extra costs can come into place. And this is particularly difficult because the arbitrators aren't a part of the business like the workers are, like the employer that runs the business is. So they can lack a lot of the details about what this business vision is, what their real costs are, how they're trying to grow, how they're going to thrive in the market. If their competitors aren't unionized and some kind of bad policies put into place, it's a major cost driver. Unions decrease the amount of research and development a business can put forth because of extra costs, and it changes the hours that people work. It changes how they work, changes where they work. So it's not just a matter of saying we want a pay increase. This arbitration process could have any manner of different policies, even things that aren't really workplace related. It could add political aspects to a workplace.
Austin Bannon, Employment Policy Fellow for Americans for Prosperity. Again, this measure advancing the House and Congress now could be up to the Senate. We'll be watching closely and check back in with you on that issue and more. Greatly appreciate time here with the Center Square Daily. We'll be right back. Illinois is gearing up to tax social media platforms in their new budget approved earlier this month. The revenue package includes a whole bunch of tax increases in a variety of capacities, but it's meant to include a social media platform that Governor J.B. Pritzker suggested could generate $200 million for public education. Now, similar moves are being made across the country. A plan to tax digital advertising for the first time and use an estimated $500 million in new annual revenue to give property tax rebates to seniors won bipartisan support in the House of Pennsylvania. And that was earlier this week. Here is just some of the debates that was covered at the Center Square out of the Pennsylvania House.
The amount of digital ad revenue based on digital ads that are targeted to Pennsylvanians is over $11 billion a year. Applying the 5% gross receipts tax to digital ad revenue could be resulting in revenue to the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania of more than $500 million a year. This is a large and growing number. Digital ad revenue around the United States grew 13% last year, 14% the year before, and a 5-year projection shows that it's going to keep growing. My amendment applies the revenue collected from the gross receipts tax by applying the gross receipts tax to digital ad revenue to property tax relief to homeowners who are over 65 or who live with someone over 65.
So you're going to have 8 school districts in this Commonwealth receive a windfall of $500 million in tax relief for their seniors. I would love to work on an amendment that would actually take these dollars, any dollars, and apply them. And I would much rather see substantive property tax relief for every single homeowner in this Commonwealth. And we have many opportunities in this legislative session to do just that. Unfortunately, they all seem to fail by one vote.
Now, the bill, it's going to be heading towards the Republican-controlled Pennsylvania Senate, where it faces an uncertain future. To talk more about this is the Center Square regional editor, Christen Smith. Christen, thanks for taking time with us. What are some of the reactions your team's hearing on this particular proposal? I mean, $500 million, it's a lot of money.
It is a lot of money. And on the surface, I think it sounds like a great idea. Who doesn't want to take that money and reduce property taxes for seniors? However, a tax on a big business like this would be, like Google, Meta, Amazon, that also is a tax on smaller businesses. And so a lot of the conversation is around that, as far as you start big and it always filters down, and then the consumer, or in this case, the taxpayer, ends up covering that extra cost that is borne by the big guys.
Yeah, businesses never really pay the tax. It's somehow pushed onto the consumer.
Right.
That's a go-to argument here. But yeah, $500 million. It seems that at least one person in the House pushed back and said, why don't we just start making property tax relief possible for all property taxpayers in Pennsylvania?
Yeah, that's something that is a perennial discussion in Pennsylvania, and it feels as likely as a meteor coming and falling out of the sky. There's been a lot of debate over the years about how to lower property taxes, but at the end of the day, generally what we get is bills like this that would raise taxes in another part of the economy to take that money and to give it to very targeted groups of taxpayers. Meanwhile, everyone else in the middle is not only paying extra on the front end for services that they interact with in their daily lives, but also higher taxes.
Christen, the legislature in session till the end of this month, correct?
Yes. I mean, that's the plan.
That's the plan. And
yeah.
Is this part of like the overall budget conversation, or would this be a separate measure that would essentially levy this new tax on digital advertisements?
The legislature loves to put tax policies like this into effect right around this time of year. Their budget's due every year at the end of the month, or at the end of this month. And so there is a big opportunity for them to update the tax law to include these things. So it's not a now or never, but there is a strong possibility that a tax policy like this could happen by June 30th. That's if they get their ducks in a row and actually pass a budget.
Now you've got, again, the House passing this, seemingly bipartisan support, but what happens when you get to the Senate? It's an interesting dynamic in Pennsylvania that I think people need to really understand.
The Senate is controlled by Republicans, and they're very unlikely to accept a House bill as is. There's a lot of contention there. And like we said before, they're worried about the downstream effect of raising taxes and how that will end up coming back on the cost of the consumer. And so that's definitely going to be a stumbling block in the Senate. And even the governor himself is saying that they're looking at the legislation, but they're really not committing one way or another as to whether they think this is a good idea.
Christen, we heard earlier about Illinois having already passed some kind of social media fee. Is this something that's, now it's Pennsylvania's talking about somehow charging a fee on digital ad taxes? Is this something that you see other states possibly looking to implement?
It's certainly growing across the country. Pennsylvania, like you just said, is not the only place. Gross receipts tax have been expanded many times over the last 100 years, and we pay it through utility bills. We pay it through our cell phones. It basically seems that every time technology advances, lawmakers turn around and expand gross receipts tax to the newest thing. So digital ads are truly the next generation of that. So even if Pennsylvania doesn't get it this year or in the next couple of months, it's not like there's not a wave of this happening throughout the country.
Christen, to wrap things up here, as we were talking, you've got the digital ad tax that the Senate could take up in Pennsylvania. What does the next 3 weeks look like for Pennsylvania taxpayers and their state government, possibly letting taxpayers know exactly how much of their money they're going to be spending?
It's a lot of uncertainty. It's the biggest time of the year for that. We are short $5 billion in what we need to cover our bills. That's been the case for years. There's also a lot of big spending priorities for public education, and it will come down to how much of the can be kicked down the road over the next 12 months fiscally in order to survive that budget gap. And generally speaking, a successful budget year is when taxes aren't raised and education gets more money. So that will be a big part of the final goal of the end of this month.
And again, $500 million from a digital ad tax sounds like a lot of money. Who's ultimately going to be paying for that? And some of the concerns we heard earlier about, is this something that's going to help all Pennsylvanians, or is it just going to go to certain school districts and for seniors? And where's that conversation about, again, leveling it out for everybody? Be sure to subscribe to the Center Square's newsletter to get Pennsylvania headlines in your inbox each and every weekday, with Christen Smith and her team keeping an eye on what's going on in Pennsylvania. We'll be right back. Are your kids learning in public school? Members of Congress are trying to get to the bottom of that question. But there's other questions about gender ideology and how that's being implemented in schools, something top of mind for a House committee that met yesterday. Among the education professionals who attended and testified in front of the U.S. House Committee on Education and Workforce Wednesday was Chicago Public Schools Superintendent Macklin King. She testified before Congress that math and reading proficiency rates for CPS students in Chicago are not acceptable. Michigan Republican U.S. Representative and Committee Chairman Tim Walberg said recent results nationwide about education outcomes shows there's a lot more work that's needed.
The latest NAEP results make clear that we must renew our focus on the fundamentals. Reading and math are the foundation of every student's success, and I think we agree on that. And too many children are still struggling to master these essential skills. While it's encouraging to see some improvement among 9-year-olds in reading and math, we still have a long way to go. 13-year-olds showed essentially no improvement, underscoring the lasting academic damage caused by school closures.
Now, concerns were raised about Chicago public schools in particular that has a 77% failure rate in reading, a 76% failure rate in math, and 88% of black students not being able to read. Now, King said the district serves more than 316,000 students, down from about 381,000 as recent as 2016, so a continued decline. But the superintendent of Chicago Public Schools explained all the different options that they have to help kids accelerate in their learning.
As students progress in their educational journey, families can choose from neighborhood and charter schools, magnet schools with specialized arts programs, world languages, and STEM, and selective enrollment schools that offer enriched learning experiences for students seeking additional academic challenges and engagement.
Now, CPS is just one example of a large city school district, and they proposed a $10 billion budget for the next school year. That's up from $6.4 billion and as recent as 2016. Chicago Public Schools has a chronic absenteeism rate of 40% for students. The chronic absenteeism rate for public school students statewide was just 25%, with the national average at 22%. Chicago, not the only school official across the country at that House committee hearing. There were several others, but things diverged away from academic outcomes and the taxpayer cost. Georgia Republican U.S. Representative Rick Allen, he brought up gender ideology with San Francisco schools official Dr. Maria Sue.
So, Dr. Sue, your guidance on trans students lists refusing to address a student by their chosen pronoun on an equal plane with egregious abuses such as physical assault motivated by hostility toward the student. Do you think that not using a student's preferred pronoun is morally equivalent with assault?
In San Francisco, we welcome all of our students as they are. We believe firmly that when we allow students to come in and truly be themselves, we are able to teach our students and support our students to be thriving adults.
Now, this is a debate that has been happening for years across the country. The question about Title IX policies meant to bring about equality for women and girls in sports spaces and other education spaces, but also the concerns about individuals changing their gender through adolescence and then trying to participate in the sports for the opposite sex they were born. A lot of lawsuits as well across the country, and even the Department of Justice getting involved in helping bring about some of this litigation. Now, Mark Harris, congressman, he raised his concerns about gender ideology, sharing stories from his constituents.
All of America is recognizing that incidents like this are happening across the country. And it's personal to me because we're seeing the same concerns in my own congressional district. Parents in Cabarrus County raise serious concerns about biological males entering girls' bathrooms and locker rooms in 2 local high schools. And the reports that my office received were deeply disturbing. And I didn't know anything else to do but to take them directly to the Department of Education.
The ongoing question about the costs of this ongoing culture war debate was something that was brought up as a point of criticism to the ongoing conversations by Arizona Democratic U.S. Representative Adelita Grijalva.
So when schools are pulled into these culture wars, the costs are real, diverting billions nationally from classrooms and making it harder to recruit and retain educators. In Arizona, our diversity is our strength. We should be focused on academic recovery, chronic absenteeism, and student mental health, not attacking school leaders working to ensure every student feels safe, supported, and included.
As this debate continues in the halls of Congress, It's also happening at school districts on a local level across the country. And it's something that arguers are saying is diverting away from the importance of focusing on academic outcomes and not social issues. We'll be keeping an eye on that, and you can stay up to date with other education reporting by getting the newsletter in your inbox at thecentersquare.com. We'll be right back. Now it's time for America's Talking with headlines from across the country. You can find these stories and more at thecentersquare.com. Get that free newsletter in your inbox every morning. Now, we've been talking a lot about education and even property tax, with Pennsylvania looking to pass a digital ad tax that legislators there say is going to provide some offsets for seniors when it comes to high property taxes. But state houses have a little impact on property taxes. It really starts to make a difference when you get down to that local level, your municipality, your school district, and so on. But to give you an example of how exactly state houses are looking to tackle these types of things, they're looking for exemptions for veterans in some areas. This coming out of Arizona's state house earlier this week.
Regarding the veterans' property tax exemption, effective for taxable years beginning January 1 of 27, it expands the disabled veteran property tax exemption to allow the surviving spouse of a disabled veteran to continue to claim the exemption if the spouse moves to another property. Additionally, it removes the income limits for disabled veterans and their surviving spouses to be eligible to receive either a partial or full property tax exemption on their primary residence.
A lot of people look to state houses to control their property taxes. Again, comes down to the local governments and their ability to manage their own finances. When it comes to local governments, you've got school districts, administrators being paid there. Some states have transportation costs. You've also got the variety of different other taxing bodies that may be on your property tax bill, from library districts to college districts, even park districts, and your municipality, village, or township. And these various measures that are in place to tax your property, it's going to pay for operations, going to pay for personnel, and sometimes going to pay for individuals who aren't even working anymore when it comes to public sector pensions. But are the local municipalities able to manage the finances they're already getting through those property taxes? In Charlotte City, North Carolina, property tax management and how to pay their employees was something that was brought up during a recent hearing, and the discussion about just how much they can increase their property taxes on residents.
Council, and as the manager said, it would be around $4.4 million. And as he said at the beginning, the 1.89% proposed property tax increase, the whole of that is towards public safety. So we went through and said, based on your feedback, can you cut it and please don't raise it more? We reallocated some, and these in this list on this table here are enhancements that were proposed as part of the 1.89 cent property tax, that we would now draw those back and use that funding towards the extra 3% in salaries.
In other areas of the country, there are conversations of allowing for voters to have a say in their property taxes, and whether or not they can have higher taxes imposed on taxpayers just simply by a municipal council's vote, instead of going to taxpayers and voters to ask for those types of tax increases. But there's also other things that people are looking to pay for when it comes to property taxes. As we've discussed, you've got education, you've got city hall responsibilities from public safety like police and fire to pensions to infrastructure to library districts, park districts, and so on. But where else can they send that money? In Nevada, late last month, there was conversation about how to fund outdoor resources, and an advocate for outdoor resources telling legislators in Nevada that some other states coming up with different ideas to tax their taxpayers more to fund outdoor operations.
It is important to note that the collective sporting community will always be happy to fund our passions, since we were the first and always will be the first community to reach a little deeper into our pockets in order to help our wildlife. But given the immense funding needed to right the ship in our public lands habitat, we need to start thinking of some 21st century ideas in order to do so. Missouri uses a portion of their sales tax to fund their state wildlife agency. Oregon just passed a law charging a 1.25% lodging tax that goes to conservation. Florida and South Carolina levy a real estate transfer tax, which funds their wildlife corridors. I mention these examples to flag that if we put our collective conservation minds together here in Nevada, we might come up with the next great conservation funding idea.
Again, you've got the state houses discussing different ways to manage how property taxpayers are paying those property taxes, exactly who could be exempt, be it senior citizens, be it veterans with disabilities, or even the spouses of those veterans. A whole different scope of conversations being had on the state level, but comes down to that local level and the advocacy of certain organizations to raise taxes, to do a host of things like paying for mental health issues, or more education, or new school buildings, and so on. We'll be keeping an eye on that for you at thecentersquare.com. Get the newsletter in your inbox. We'll be right back with more. It's going to be a hot one here in central Illinois today. I think the heat index is going to be upwards to 102 degrees. And I got some yard work I got to get done at some point. After a long day of doing yard work or other projects in the hot sun, a nice cold beer does wonders. But it also comes with some high tax rates in certain states. Welcome back to the Center Square Daily. I'm your host, Greg Bishop. And let's take a look at what the Tax Foundation says. In the United States, taxes are the single most expensive ingredient in beer. That's right. When you go to your store, be it a convenience store, be it a specialty store, and you're picking up your flight of different types of beers to try for the weekend, think about how much you're paying in tax per gallon for that brew. And the Tax Foundation breaking this down with knowledge that, yes, there's a federal excise tax on beer, but states also implement their own beer taxes. There's also taxes on wine. There's taxes on liquor. And if you're in a state that has legal recreational cannabis, marijuana, there's also taxes on that, but we'll save conversations about those tax dollars for a different day. Today, let's just focus on beer. All right, so the Tax Foundation breaking down the highest and the lowest, and it ranges from 2 cents per gallon all the way up to $1.29 per gallon, where Tennessee lands. So again, here's the top 5 of beer taxes per gallon. Tennessee, $1.29 per gallon. Alaska, $1.07 per gallon. Hawaii, 93 cents. Kentucky, 89 cents. And South Carolina, 77 cents. Be sure to comment below if you are a beer drinker and in one of those states. And just to give you kind of some insight on how much these states are generating in tax dollars from your pockets, Tennessee gets around $13 to $14 million from beer drinkers. Now, the Alaska Department of Commerce, they have all alcohol sales included in their number, and they collect around $12 million from those who imbibe. Hawaii gets upwards to $19 million in tax revenue from beer drinkers. But maybe you find yourself in a state with some of the lowest beer taxes. Say you're going into a convenience store in Wisconsin. You're only going to be paying 6 cents per gallon of beer. And thinking about just how big a gallon of beer is, that's a lot of brew. But lowest beer sales taxes across the country: Colorado at 8 cents, Pennsylvania also at 8 cents, Wisconsin 6 cents, Missouri 6 cents, and Wyoming 2 cents. Now, if you're guessing that Wyoming doesn't really take that much more from taxpayers, you're right. And they bring in about $1.5 million from beer drinkers. Wisconsin, though, even though they have 6 cents per gallon of beer, they take upwards to $10 million from beer drinkers. Not sure if that is more of a reflection on some stereotypes of those in Wisconsin, but in Pennsylvania, they also collect a lot of tax dollars from those who enjoy malt beverages to the tune of $30 million in such beer taxes. Now, the Tax Foundation says some notable changes in the most recent tax on beer is in Arkansas, that actually decreased by 1 cent per gallon to 37 cents per gallon of beer sales. Tax Foundation also showing that the tax on beer in Utah increased by 1/8 of a cent per gallon to 43.9 per gallon. And that, again, is pennies. It's scheduled to increase similar every year starting July 1st in 2027. Now, myself, when I'm done with a long day of yard work, weed eating, mowing, and all that jazz, I enjoy a nice light lager or a Pilsner or some kind of blonde. It definitely helps out after sweating and being in the sun. And I want you to comment below your favorite brew and where you're at, because it'll be interesting to see if you're in some of the highest beer tax states or the lowest beer tax states. Be sure to comment below. From my studios in Central Illinois, I'm Greg Bishop, and you can join us back here Thursday for more stories impacting you, the taxpayer, from all around the country, only with the Center Square Daily.